À ceux et celles qui sont intervenus avant moi, j'ai pas préparé mes propos en français, et puis c'est pas bilingue non plus, parce que ça fait plus de 10 ans que je travaille exclusivement en anglais, donc je me fais plus confiance de faire des discours en français. J'espère que tout le monde est bilingue ici, donc ça va aller. Okay, merci. So I have entitled mine the Africa Just Outside of Your Hilton Hotel Window. And the idea is that the Black History Month and the essence of it all should also once in a while take a look at what's going on with the situation in the mother continent, the source of it all. This is my third Black History Month event this year, the third in which I'm having to speak. I've attended nearly a dozen others as a cheering member of the audience. One theme seems to stand out this year: an overwhelming awareness of the urgency of owning and telling one's stories. In fact, the first one I addressed was in Montreal at McGill by a student union, and they actually give me a specific theme, that has everything to do with the idea of Black stories and our ability to own and tell those stories on our own terms, using social media. And every other subsequent event I've been to have been variations on owning one's stories. The sentiment that Black humanity has stories to tell, which are either silenced or improperly narrated, or narrated by others more powerful than us and for ends that have little to do with us, has been around since the beginning of modern Black imagination and intellectual thought. Many of the African and Black radical ideologies of the 20th century were, in a very basic sense, efforts to address what Achebe calls an imbalance of stories. No African or Black person needs to be introduced to the concrete consequences of your inability to tell or to own your stories. But not all of us understand that the realities we suffer from, what shapes and informs our struggles here in the Western world, in the Caribbean, and on the mother continent, Africa, is a function of stories and our ability to open up spaces of agency with stories. I'll give you two examples to illustrate what I mean. I arrived in Canada in the summer of 1998 to start my doctoral program in French at the University of British Columbia. You just heard that. A handful of us, Africans, had been admitted into various PhD programs across campus that year, and we met and bonded as might be expected. My own immediate circle of African friends comprised two other Nigerian guys and a Cameroonian lady, who happened to be the only one among us who lived on campus, in campus residence. The rest of us rented apartments in town. I must mention that the Cameroonian lady in question is an Anglophone. Anglophone Cameroonians had been part of Nigeria before colonial mappings and remappings eventually dumped them in Cameroon as one Anglophone minority fish in a massive Francophone sea. In essence, Anglophone Cameroonians still share considerable cultural commonalities with the peoples of Nigeria's deep south, especially cuisine. Our Cameroonian colleague was a great cook. I hope she still is, because she's a big shot now in the UN. She works for the UN now. Her residential apartment on campus became a regular stop for those of us who were lazy bachelors in the community of African doctoral students. She was constantly treating us to jollof rice, fufu, egusi, ogbon. You can name some of these things, I'm sure you. Groundnut soup, eforiru, all spiced with the ingredients of Africa. Our culinary treats in her apartment lasted only a few weeks before trouble started. This was in the fall of 1998. So we would go and just stop over and have our African get-togethers, stuff like this, and she would cook and cook and cook and cook. But a few weeks later, trouble started. Her graduate student residential apartment was a 3-bedroom affair with common areas. 3 students shared a living room, a kitchen, 2 bathrooms, and a few other common facilities. She was the only African in that setup. She had 2 Canadian roommates. One evening, I stopped by her apartment hoping to be treated to fufu and ogbono soup, as usual. But she offered to microwave a slice of pizza for me. You can imagine the disaster. Then came her shocking story. She had been summoned by University Residence Administration because they received complaints from her roommates about the odor and the smell of her constant African cooking. She was advised to somehow tone down the smell of her food or cook in such a way as not to inconvenience her roommates. Many of you here are francophones, so you must hear echoes of Jacques Chirac's Le Bruit et l'Odeur. I'm sure you know that story. Okay. And you know the song, the rap song, Le Bruit et l'Odeur, Le Bruit et l'Odeur, Le Bruit du bateau-piqueur. Okay. So, what did you do? When she told me this story, my first reaction, so what did you do? I asked her. What can I do? She asked in return, demonstrating her African cred. For only Africans answer questions with questions. Especially, you must know that story about the Nigerian, who was told that if you get to Nigeria, be careful. They answer questions with questions. And the guy gets to the airport, sees an immigration officer. Is it true that you guys answer questions with questions? Yeah. Who told you that? So what can I do? She asked in return. I assured her that there was plenty we could do. I assured her that there was plenty we needed to do. I wanted to know, for starters, if her roommates, those whose civilized nostrils had been offended by the foul odor and smell of African food, did any cooking of their own in the shared kitchen. Yes, they did. They cooked pasta, they baked quiche, tart, and pizza. They made the obligatory poutine, and there was cheese in the fridge. Armed with this information, we booked an appointment with university residents. Of course, I had mobilized a few other African students, so we're going to see these guys. When we got there, I had a few questions for them. I wanted them to explain to me how they arrived at the determination that Canadian cuisine had an aroma while African cuisine had an odor. I wanted them to explain to me how they arrived at a ranking of the smell of food, which had food smelling really nice, which had Western food smelling really. The African occupant of that apartment was not just as inadapted to the smell of the cooking of her Canadian roommates as they were to hers. To cut a long story short, my Cameroonian friend earned the right to cook African delicacies again in her apartment because we insisted on telling stories. We recognize the fact that even in the business of womandizing, there are power relations, and the difference between your food having an aroma or an odor could come down to your ability to tell your story efficiently. This happened in 1998 in Vancouver. Fast forward to 2016 in Ottawa. Shortly after I assumed my new position as director of Carleton University's Institute of African Studies, I began to receive extraordinary gestures of warmth, goodwill, and collegial fellowship from Carleton IAS community in particular and the university community in general. Truth be told, I have never felt as honored, loved, and valued by my colleagues as in the 2 months that I have spent on the hot seat as director. But there will always be the one spoiler to remind you of the necessity of our stories and the struggles they bear. I received an email one day from a highly placed individual who had expressed interest in the work of the Institute. Although this person was not in any way connected to the Institute, he was involved in projects that I felt could be incorporated into one of our platforms. So I sent him the concept note of the project in question, and I asked if he might be interested in joining. Remember, he had initiated a contact. I was in my corner quietly, and this person writes me. At this stage, I wasn't really seeking his comments or opinion on the project, but we had already gone far with it because he was the one who wrote an inquiry, and I said, okay, given your profile, you might fit into this, take a look at this. So I really didn't want his opinion. Just look at the stages and tell me where you fit in, and we'll add. So all I needed was for him to see if he wanted to be part of it or not. I got a response informing me that the project appeared to be too ideological. There was just one liner of an email. Interesting, but ideological. Because ideological is a very broad basket, so I had to press. I wanted to know what he meant by ideological. So I pressed for an explanation of what was meant by ideological, only to be told that the project presented too positive an image of Africa. By now my temper was rising. I managed to control myself and sent a measured response saying that our mission and mandate are unapologetically ideological in that sense, if that is his definition of ideological. We do not deny the challenges facing Africa, but through the disciplines of the humanities and the social sciences, we're part of a global community of struggle trying to offer a more nuanced and more complex picture of Africa. We're saying that the stories of Africa are diverse and multiple. We're saying that there is innovation, genius, industry, modernity, love, and laughter. We are saying that there is an Africa beyond the single story of war and poverty. So that's me taking my time to explain the mandate of the Institute to this person. That's me describing it in I was boiling. I felt like, but I said, okay, hey, you're a director now, so you have to be diplomatic and all that. And this is a very high-ranking member of the university. So I took my time and I sent this explanation. He replied. He sent another email. This time around, he sends me a link. He sends me a link in his response. The link features a map of Africa dotted with red ink. And of course, there's red ink all over this. As soon as you click on it, you see this map. And then there are red dots everywhere. Everywhere. And of course, there's the key to the map explaining the meaning of the red dots. The key to the map indicates that the red ink stands for everywhere there is hunger and undernourishment in Africa. And so this person sends me a map of hunger and undernourishment in Africa. The story would perhaps have been only mildly irritating if this person had stopped at just sending me a map of hunger and undernourishment. But then he writes a little note. He says, well, this is what Africa looks like to me. So this is, I get an email in response to my 3 paragraphs explaining that we're telling multiple and diverse stories. We're not denying problems, but we're saying there is more. And then he sends me this link, and this is what Africa looks like to me. This is about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Well, this colleague who in 2016 dared to send me an email saying that Africa is only hunger and undernourishment got a stinker of a response from me that even Donald Trump would have described as over the top. He won't forget me very, very quickly. He won't. I shouldn't go into my response, but I made sure that I was very pleased with myself after clicking send. I have brought you 2 anecdotes from the West Coast and the East Coast of Canada, separated by more than a decade, one in 1998 and one in 2016. Not to claim that there has been no progress on the terrain of racial struggles since I came to Canada in 1998. What I want you to take away from these 2 anecdotes is the fact that a certain effort is put into telling your story in a certain kind of way. A certain effort, a certain amount of effort is put into telling your story in a certain kind of way. And you need to understand that. The challenge, therefore, is not in always screaming that we are victims of misrepresentation, of stereotypes, of single stories. The point is, do you understand the fact that misrepresentations and stereotypes are products of effort and energy? Does your effort to tell your own story match the effort that is put into misrepresenting and stereotyping you? Let us attempt a genealogy of the path to reductionist stereotypes. I have written elsewhere about a category of Western narrators of Africa. I believe it's in You Are Not a Country, Africa. I think it's in that book or some of my other essays. A category of Western narrators of Africa I refer to as the Hilton Hotel Africanist. This is the journalist or the writer or scholar or documentary maker or adventurist or charity worker or development worker or expert or expatriate who arrives in any part of the capital city of the African continent, the capital cities of the African continent, checks into the Hilton Hotel in town and gets to work. Getting to work means getting organized so that eventually Africanists will be able to start sending dispatches back to the New York Times or the Globe and Mail or CNN or Washington Post and all that jazz. However, if you have been to the Hilton in any African capital city, who's been to any of the Hiltons? I've been to the one in Abuja, I've seen the one in Joburg, I've seen the one in... Who's been to any of the Hiltons across the continent? Okay, so which one did you...
Cotonou.
Oh, the Hilton in Cotonou. So I've been to quite a number of those Hilton chains, across the continent. If you have been to the Hilton in any of Africa's capital cities, these hotels are always located in various posh and swanky areas of town. When our Africanist wakes up in the morning and opens his Hilton hotel window, often orange juice in hand or coffee, the view of Africa which greets him is malls and skyscrapers and fast-moving luxury cars on glossy roads because of the areas of town where these hotels are located. Yet, When he sends his dispatches about Africa back to Europe or America, nothing of the Africa he sees from his hotel window is present in the report. All that is left is Ebola, AIDS, Boko Haram, wars and conflict, hunger and malnutrition. How does this happen? How do you wake up in the morning at the Hilton in Abuja and you open, and they don't stay, they will stay at the 40 or the 50 or the 70th floor. That's where they're going to stay, and then they open this thing and you see this modern sprawl and what they see and all. So how do you get from there to the stories you subsequently dispatch? So how does this happen? It means that from his base in the Hilton Hotel, this Africanist organizes expeditions into the Africa he has come to look for, hiring local agents to take him to locations of poverty and despair, completely ignoring the modernity to which he returns in the capital every evening. And I've seen that all the time. I've been part of a project. I've been part of a project that nearly got us into trouble back in 2005, because a friend of mine who was then head of the military expenditure unit of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SPUSA. Some of you may have heard of SPUSA. Had this idea of organizing a donors convention in Abuja. Let's invite some of our friends into a retreat. And I was then teaching at Penn State University. I wasn't in Ottawa yet. It was still one year away. Anyway, somehow he invited me to be part of it, facilitators and he brought people from the usual big donor agencies, Bill and Melinda Gates, and we all went to Abuja. A day into the program, I overheard some of the would-be donors at breakfast. Because, of course, Abuja, it's been built from nowhere out of oil money. It's like Dubai. Nigeria has so much oil money, so they built this modernity from nowhere, so it's sprung. And so I had folks complaining that, wait a minute, this is a first world city. Yeah, and these guys brought us here to tell us that there were challenges. And so I went to call my friend. I said, your conference is going to backfire. Nobody is going to give you money. I'm hearing things at breakfast, And so we had to quickly charter a bus and organize an excursion to Africa, to show folks what Africa they wanted to see. So I've been, and these kinds of things. So they hire local agents, to take him to locations of poverty, despair, completely ignoring the modernity to which he returns in the capital every evening. In essence, if you look at the scenario I'm describing, it takes a lot of effort to produce a documentary reducing you to Ebola. It takes a lot of organization to produce a documentary reducing more than 1 billion people in 54 countries to hunger and malnutrition. And it takes the exceptional willpower to be blind to everything else you see around you in the neighborhood of your Hilton, in Abuja or Nairobi or Johannesburg, because you are trying to make poverty fall. And by the way, the hunger and malnutrition map of Africa that was sent to me, so as to tell me that the work of my institute is too positive. That's from the FAO. That's from the FAO, the Food and Agriculture. So folks sit down in a room. Imagine how many folks were commissioned to go and just paint the entire continent red to come up with that. So it's folks like the guy who sent me that link. You know, he was one of the participants and actually was trying to tell me that, yeah, I went, you know, and this is all I saw. You've got to deal with me. I'm one of the people who contributed to the FAO report. And I said, you know, to hell with you and the FAO and all that. Come with me to the continent. And I'll have you bloated with a pot belly, you know, between acheke and fufu and all that. what malnutrition is. So it takes effort and considerable organization and diligence to tell lies about you or distort your story. Once your story is distorted, your world is equally distorted. Does Africa understand that it also takes effort and organization and dedication to tell your own truths and your own stories? I think somebody in Africa understands this better than Africa does, and that is China. Many of you here are perhaps already aware of the fact that there is a story called China in Africa. It's the biggest academic, everybody in the humanities, everybody in the arts, all the fields, everybody is writing dissertations on China in Africa, China in Africa. And if you travel across the continent, you know that this is real. You know, China is happening and it's big. So it's a huge thing. The West has also been doing a lot of talking about China in Africa. If you at some point, if you watch the CNN, here we can, you know, if you watch CNN International, you see the obsession, you know, China in Africa and all that. And the West has been saying that the sky is falling because of, you know, China in Africa. The discourse is so alarmist. All the usual spokespersons of the West have been demonizing China. As Secretary of State Hillary Clinton once told Africa to warn us, I was in fact in Nigeria when she, you know, oh, you guys, China, be careful. You know, and the discourse is just this, you can't do business with these guys, you can't trust these guys, you can't. So everybody is demonizing China. And I'm sure if you've been following Le Monde, if you've been listening to pundits on France 24, everywhere you go, China is evil. China is evil. You know. Of course, we know that the West is not sensitizing us to the dangers of dalliance with China because she loves Africa so much. It is the fear of competition and displeasure at being overtaken by China in the scramble for the resources of Africa that is determining the way in which the West is shaping the story of China in Africa. In fact, this fear was brought home to me sometime last year when I was invited by DFET. They are now GAC, right? The Foreign Affairs Ministry here. They are now Global Affairs Canada, right? They used to be DFET. So I get invited by the African Affairs, the big Africa division of Foreign Affairs here, for a working session. It was supposed to be about Africa. But when I got there, you know, they're sprawling in the edifice there in Sussex Drive. You know. When I got there, I saw so many China specialists. I was being introduced to division China, Specialist Bank of China. Yeah. What's going on? Isn't it supposed to be a working session? There's a new government in town. The new government is very serious about Africa. That's the narrative. So if you are the director of that was my sense going in, because we are the only Institute of African Studies in any Canadian university. So the government deals with us a lot. So why is everybody I'm being introduced to somehow connected to China? It was around lunch that I started to understand the thinking. That this government is thinking, oh, China has become so dominant in the continent. And it is true that there is no way to get new critical thinking about the continent without dealing with that reality that is China. So let's bring the China specialists together and let the Africanists speak. And then we see a way through this problem. So everybody is scared of this China thing. What has China done about it? Which is where I'm going in terms of stories. Owning your stories. China gets tired of her story in Africa constantly being told by CNN, by BBC, by Radio France, and everybody else. China gets tired and begins to pump money extremely seriously into CCTV Africa. CCTV Africa is China's answer to Al Jazeera. So it's the, if you go across the continent, it's unbelievable the level of that. Exactly the way Al Jazeera started pumping money and taking all the journalists from CNN and all the big chains. CCTV is spending serious money. But here is one thing I also discovered about them just last summer. I had gone to see a very famous Nigerian writer. It was his birthday. And he had just returned from a reading tour of Germany. And we were talking. And he says, and he turns on the TV. Sorry, the only channel that is working is CCTV. And I said, what happened? I said, well, interesting story. Interesting story. I was in Germany for a month. So obviously I did not pay my DSTV bill, my Rogers or Bell, didn't pay. And his cable service got disconnected. So when he got back, he discovered that even with the disconnection, CCTV was still working. Why? China is subsidized. You cannot disconnect CCTV in Africa. It's not possible. You must listen to that story told by China from China's perspective. So CNN can be there. So when your provider disconnects you, CCTV is the only thing that is left standing. I thought it was a joke. This was in Nigeria, right? 2 months later, I'm in Accra. I'm with another friend. Similar story. Oh, if they disconnect my TV, China is paying for CCTV. When I got to Pretoria and saw the same thing, they cannot disconnect. I said, okay, now this is serious business. This is serious business. This is about realizing the importance of stories, the importance of matching effort, for effort, because they got tired. They had a story to tell. Now, of course, the picture is not too good for Africa in terms of these competition for who gets to narrate what. But there is a moral there. It means you have the same Western channels trying to demonize the Chinese and all that, and the Chinese now saying, no, we're telling that story. We're shipping China in Africa and the story behind it. So you hear it directly from Beijing. You hear it directly from Beijing. And chances are, with the way things work across the continent, chances are, very often you won't be able to pay your TV bills, so your CNN and your BBC and all that, they're always getting disconnected. So you're left in the hands of China. So they know what they are, but then that's recognition of the power of stories. And I'm concluding by saying, what's the moral of this story of what China is doing with CCTV in the continent? I think the moral is that the future belongs to those who understand the fact that efforts to reduce you to a story must be matched or overwhelmed by your own efforts to shine as a diversity of stories, which is what I have learned from the Chinese experience. And I must conclude by telling you what then happens when you master your own story. 3-4 years ago, if you're going through Cotonou, there's of course all the massive construction in Cotonou is being undertaken by the Chinese, and all that. And in 2012, 2013, I did a road trip from Accra to Lagos. All the billboards, all the Chinese billboards that I saw in 2012, 2013, you'll see inscriptions in Mandarin or Cantonese, but everything translated to French on all the billboards. 2 years later, in 2014, same trip, same billboards, everything now in Mandarin or Cantonese. Advertisement billboards, no translations in French. I took pictures. I said, aha. 2 years ago, when you were masters, we were translating. Now we are the masters of the terrain. It's you who must learn Mandarin or Cantonese to deal with us here in Cotonou, owning your stories. Thank you.
Professor Adesamni, thank you very much on behalf of St. Paul University.
He's taking pictures.
I have,
Nobody's taking pictures. Claudia, nobody's taking pictures. No, this is a video.
Thank you very much. Let's hear it once more. Thank you.
Last speaker.